Our conversation today is going to be the first video in a series that I'm going to be doing with multiple producers, engineers, some of them really well known, so some great surprises coming up. But the first one of the series I wanted to make a little different, and that's why I chose former Chimaira, 6 Feet Under, and currently the elite guitarist Rob Arnold. He's not only a producer and engineer, but has extensive time on the road and in the studio as a guitarist and participating songwriting partner and band member. So he's dealt with bass as being a partner in a band, but also in working with it in the studio as both a member of a group and as someone having to record those parts. He also has done bass himself and has done it on some of the Elite and some other projects of his own. So he brings a really great group of insights that the average producer or engineer even isn't going to have. So I thought he would be a great kickoff to the series. So let's get to it, our conversation with Rob Arnold. So thanks again and welcome to Rob Arnold.
Hey,
Good
thanks.
to have you, man. Thanks for coming on.
Glad to be here.
Cool. So again, as I mentioned in the intro, I thought you'd have a lot of interesting perspectives when it comes to metal bass and everything, because as some people might not know, you do bass on your own recordings and with your new project, which is sounding killer, by the way. But again, you've had production experience, songwriting experience, touring with bassists and having them integral to the band and negotiating sound and that type of thing. So you've got a lot of different perspectives, especially with metal bass. So I'm really interested to hear all those combined into your overall thoughts on it. I guess the initial thing would be, starting from the bottom, how do you view the role of bass in what you do and metal in general?
Well, I think it's important. I think that, I guess to me, the bass is just that important layer of foundation, the foundation of the band's sound, and a glue that keeps the instruments together, really keeps the feel and the vibe glued together. I remember my very first band, we were just two guitar players and a drummer. And the other guys kept saying, yeah, we got to get a bass player. And I remember saying, why? Everything sounds great. You know, we don't need a bass player for, because you don't know until you feel, until we got a bass player. And I felt what it was like to, have the bass have impact on downbeats, or just stuff like that, what it could add, and that low end to really glue everything together is where I realized its importance. And obviously that's carried into today. Every song that I'm writing in the computer or with guys or whatever, I always say, oh, and wait till you hear this with bass, because it's just, everybody thinks it sounds great already, but once you add that in, all of a sudden there's this new layer, this new foundation that feels solid. So I'd say that's the role of the bass player, to hold it down.
Got it. Now, because you've been in a couple of really prominent projects, and you've also had projects that you're not just a participating member, but more the kind of mastermind behind, do you find that the role of bass changes from project to project, or as the aspect of the band? Like, was the role of the bass maybe a little different in 6 Feet Under than Chimaira, or in the Elite, that it's either its prominence or how it sits or how much it comes forward, that kind of thing, that it changes per project?
I'd say that it changes more so on the style of the player. Even though, well, 6 Feet Under, the Elite, Chimaira, my main things that I've played on, I think bring the same style bass wise to all those, but different players that I've tracked or that I've played with, there's the guys that, such as yourself, let's say, that's really technical and tasteful, and I feel you want to do everything you can with the bass and dance around in there, bringing everything together, but also having your voice really heard. And then there are other guys that really want to just sit in the background and play the root notes, not in a bad way, but just hold it down, and that's it. There's in between. So I don't think that the convenience isn't there so much anymore of people really knowing their parts. Back in the day, when you jam in a rehearsal room for months, writing these songs, there was so much time to work out your parts. And you'd show up at the studio, you knew you were going to play. But I'd say more often today, guys show up kind of like with this blank canvas when it comes to bass. It's almost like they've waited to hear, or it's because they had to wait to hear the guitars in there with the drums and what kind of sound is going to be there. And then you kind of figure out how to lay in that bass. And that's really what I've done on the albums I've played in. It's just bass was kind of the afterthought, because writing all the guitar parts, I'm like, okay, now I got to put in the bass. And so when I get in there, I have a lot of fun deciding what to play, and that's cool. But I would say my style, I just kind of have a certain thing of how I go about whatever I'm going to work on. Like, I'm not going to get super crazy for something, but I just kind of approach each player and each project based on what they have going on.
Gotcha. Well, first, thanks for the kind words about my stuff. I appreciate that. And you touched on something really interesting. It's something I'm actually going to be addressing in one of my other videos. But do you really feel that there is a loss in the amount of interactivity in between the instruments, and how much, I guess, bass players can participate in the music, but also just as a group, how much interplay there is, because so much music is kind of computer based or scripted out ahead of time, rather than, like you were saying, where it's a long time in a rehearsal hall of everybody kind of finding their spot and finding the holes where they live and putting that together, that you hear more of a, okay, this is all kind of a preset and now we're going to work around it. That kind of cuts back a little bit of this.
Yeah, I think that spontaneity and, well, no, more so discovery about how the instruments can play together and stuff is lost nowadays. Now, I don't want to sound like this guy, like, oh, well, they just don't make them like they used to, or whatever, because there's really, unless a band makes a conscious decision to go back and do it the old way, they're not going to. Technology just makes everything easier and more streamlined, and you could do things more remotely, and it's just easy, so everyone's fallen into that. But when you used to jam, when you couldn't rely on just writing into the computer and you had to remember your parts and you think about them at night to come back to jam the next day, and everyone's working on a transition, what works, what part of the neck feels best or sounds best for this particular part, that working out amongst different brains and hearing it in real time, I think added a lot to the music that we grew up on that just isn't stumbled upon with one brain and a computer these days, or even two brains, without feeling how a transition or a certain bar is going to feel sometimes, and just hearing it right there for you. Or instead of saying, here, let's try this, and having to play a different part to see what it feels like, you just pop it in, and then part of the discovery is lost of when you would have tried something else. So yeah, I think there's a big change in the interaction of instruments, and thus the cool little elements that are forever lost now and that will never be discovered.
Sure.
Because
And
you just stumble upon them.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying there too. It's, sometimes people can be, the stereotype of, well, it's not how it used to be. And for me, it's not anti-technology though. For me, I don't feel that people are taking technology far enough. That one thing I've been disappointed in, and I think would start to liven up these things, especially, going back to bass participation and having more of a group environment, is people will isolate themselves when they do this type of thing, whereas it's totally possible to organize networks where you could be in different locations, but all writing and creating and recording at the same time. And that's not happening. You could still have that moment. I could still say, hear a drum beat coming in from a great player and react to it, and have the guitar player in a totally other location still hear it and nail it. And we would have a master recording done well. And that could happen, but it seems like people are going for the faster product.
I get what you're saying, but are you saying that you think that that's possible from different locations? Because I just didn't think it was possible yet because of the lag, of the internet or whatever. And I look forward to the day where you in California right now and I could play together But right now it'd be impossible because we'd be like a second apart. Is that what you were saying? That is possible?
Yeah, there could be a lot more in that development. Like if you took half as much the research that goes into the 9 billion plugins that people are using to recreate this stuff and everything, and
Yeah.
put it into really streamlined network recording interfaces, that could easily be done. I mean, you can look at even what we're doing here. This isn't a fantastic connection, and it's over, just a basic Skype type of connection and everything, but the lag isn't that bad. When we watch this recording back, it's still going to be in real time. It's not going to be long gaps in between us understanding each other. So it's not that bad. And even at that, you could still throw things around,
Sure.
and start a recording process of, say your drummer comes up with some beats. Here's some stuff I really like, and that gets shared. And then I have a reaction to it. I play a bass line, and then you have an idea, and then it's, it can still circulate that way. And I find a lot less people are doing that than one person kind of developing an idea almost to completion and everybody else just kind of fitting in, like you were saying. So I can see that would have an impact, like we're saying. And in a strange way, I feel like that almost does, going back to an earlier statement, impact bass the most, because it tends to be the instrument that fits in. Then so much space has been kind of taken up by the person almost trying to be bass or fill out that space because they want to hear the finished product, that it's not left there. So that's a really, these are exactly the type of insights, and why I thought, you'd have some great ideas on this, is you see that from a guitar point and from a production point, and recognizing how that may cut into one instrument more than another. So
and to go with what you said before, I'm not anti-technology either. I just think people could benefit from jamming a little bit together first, and then going to the computer, then putting it all in there, then feeling free to arrange anything like that, or throwing in an idea here. But if you've taken a little bit of time just to work out, to feel what the song is going to feel like there are lots of albums that I know the musicians have never even played the songs together. You know what I mean? Until they have to go on the road, and then they get guys to come in, or their band or whatever comes in, and because the guitar player and the drummer just wrote the whole thing and recorded it into Pro Tools, whatever. So yeah, a lot of that's happening, and just there's that element of playing together that I think people could benefit from trying to get back into a little bit.
Sure. And it's, every player has that feel, and I think that's also led to why so much music, too, without getting off on a total tangent, it's gotten so hardline quantized and things like that, is people don't take that time to gel with each other. So it's like, okay, let's all refine it down to this common denominator that we know we'll be in time with, rather than let's find out how we get in time with each other. And then you've got that unique feel that, a lot of bands stumble into. But outside of that, and going back to it, now when you started playing bass yourself and started doing it on projects, did your thoughts about bass change from when you were strictly a guitar player, or how you thought it would be approached?
Well, I started playing in the studio just out of necessity. It was Chimaira's Age of Hell record in 2011, and the band had kind of broken down at that point, and the remaining members were myself, Matt DeVries on guitar, but he wasn't even part of that recording. He was doing something else, and so Mark, the singer, and I were just playing some guitar, and our producer Ben Schigel was writing and recording the drums, but we didn't have a bass player, so I had written a lot of the riffs and could play the songs, and I said, I'll just play bass. Of course, I had dabbled around before and everything, but this is my first time recording. I remember just kind of going into it thinking like, all right, well, I'll play the guitar riffs just on bass. And on finding that, I just realized, wow, it's more about what sounds good for this rather than what the guitar player is playing. The guitar player's riff should be my outline, I think. But if he's playing 16th notes, maybe it sounds better for me to play quarter notes. If he's playing triplets, maybe I just hit that first beat of each triplet instead. Maybe in verse or chorus 1, I'm matching the guitars, but in chorus 2, I'm doing halftime feel. to just add a different sonic element to the part and give it a different dynamic, even though it's the same part, a different chorus. But things like that, sounding in tune with the guitars, even. You know, I find a lot of the time that where I thought I was going to play the riff, it may not sound as in tune as other parts of the neck, like the octave, different octaves. So just experimenting and having to experiment to find what's going to sound best for the bass to fulfill its job of being just the solid low end foundation and being as interesting as it can at the same time, was the fun kind of challenge for me, and part of the puzzle I always like to put together when putting music together.
Sure, that's interesting that you say that same thing, and it's I find that's a common. Having been on a number of auditions and stuff, I think it's funny that seems to be kind of where it starts with guitar, but it inevitably always comes back to that point. Like, I've been out a few times and somebody be like, here's the riff, here's the riff, here's the riff, and I'll learn it. And then just to do it, I'll change up the part or do something a little different. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, do that. Now, when they were really hard initially, like, no, just play that riff, man. We really want to lock in and really want to do this. And then I'll play something that's either more supportive or fills something out or takes out a little space that they left in a piece. Then all of a sudden they don't want me to play the riffs anymore. Let's go to that. So it's it really is interesting how it can start from that point and then it grows out as the person gets more in touch with, well, this is a different way to look at the same music.
Exactly. They weren't aware of that other perspective before, and once they hear it, oh, that is good, that is cool. You know, just to hear that other perspective. So, yep, I agree.
So, now, since you produce, and I know you've had a big hand in a lot of the recordings and albums that you've been on, not just from the guitar end of things, where do you find that bass, especially on stuff that you're doing 100% on your own or have the majority control, where it sits in the recording process, like in the order of instruments and how it's approached? Like, some people even wait till after full guitars are done and set it in. Some people do it right after drums. Then there's also kind of where they put it in as far as how it sits in the mix, like how they try and fill it in. Does it have an actual space where it lives, or is it dialed in after everything else to find what hole it can live in? That kind of thing. Like, how do you approach it when you're going to start a new album or a new project?
I would say the order for when bass is tracked is always the same for me. It would always be after rhythm guitars are tracked. I go drums, guitars, bass, then solos, anything else, keys, stuff like that, then vocals. And I'm always editing along the way too. I want guitars to be tracked to is a great drum edit, or, you know, just so they're sounding great. I want the bass to be tracked to great guitars that are in tune. They're just the way they're going to be. Because if you don't do that, and then you go to play the bass to them, and then you go back, let's say, in the mix or whatever, and you realize, oh, this part could have been better. So I like to solidify each piece as I go, and then yada yada, and finally I want the vocalist to shine over the best production they can at that point in the production. You know what I'm saying? I shouldn't be singing over half done parts, or that the bass is missing, or whatever. You want them to be confident that this is the best it's going to be at that point for them to sing over. So I've considered bass after drums, but for part of the reason I said before, the tuning thing, I think it's easy, since bass is primarily single tracked and guitars are going to be double tracked. I think it's easier to have to make adjustments in terms of tuning and what you're going to play to guitars that are already there versus having the guitar players play, because it doesn't sit right with the bass. I'd rather make adjustments in the bass. Sorry to you as a bass player. You know, you'd probably rather the opposite.
It's funny enough. I find that makes a lot of sense too. I know a lot of guys who at least are, you know, try and be more prominent, like I do in a lot of stuff, that they'll want to do the bass initially, but it's kind of my sneaky way around of actually getting a little more prominent is waiting till guitars are finished. And then I can do last minute EQ cuts or little things, or it's like I get to hear closer to the end product and go, okay, where can I boost a little bit or cut a little bit to cut through even more? So it's like I hear those finished guitars, it's like, oh, okay, you left me a gap at 1K. Daddy's coming in here. This is that's what we're gonna jump out at you at.
Nice.
So
I never really thought of it that way, which is a great way to think about it, to approach the frequency spectrum like that while tracking. Honestly, not that this is good practice or anything, I just try to get a solid tone. I don't think a lot about how it sounds. I mean, I just want it to sound awesome with the mix I currently have. But then I dial in the tone after it's been tracked. So it's a great recording. The feel's there, the pocket's there, bass player's done. At that point, then once I start mixing, I'll usually cross over and start affecting my high end. I like to build the low end with the crossover. Familiar with that technique?
Sure.
And I'll build my tone that way, and I start carving it out then too. Where's the kick drum? What's going to be prominent? The bass of the kick drum in terms of the certain frequencies and everything. But I never thought about that first. Deciding that 750K is available. All right, let's. I never thought of that. So it's cool.
Yeah, well, I'm sure being an accomplished engineer and producer yourself, that the thing about you have a great sound, and then as soon as you combine it with the other instruments, all of a sudden it sounds utterly different.
Yeah.
So that's always been, again, like how I get to do my sneak thing is if I'm going to sit in and somebody goes like, oh, we're going to do everything, I'm like, yeah, run with it, go ahead, I'll take care of it later. I have my core sound, and I'll come to the project with that sound, and then I'll listen to what they've done, and I've gone, okay, they're kind of stepping on what I usually do here. What can I move around to now find where they left a gap, and I can leap around it instead of winding up being further down in the mix because there's too much doubling up on a frequency or something like that. And it's that kind of approach has really saved me in a number of projects, is still being heard and contributing, where something's being quad tracked or something, and they're just eating up so much room guitar wise, and the sound I would usually use gets eaten up or smothered. It's, I'll even go through with, a frequency analyzer or something. If I can't hear it right away, just go, where are their peaks? I'll find the valleys and go, it's the Bruce Lee use of water, I'll flow around you and find a place I'm still going to get in your face with. And
that's awesome. And another thing about what you said there that I just don't run into often is a guy showing up with his tone. Like it's seldom. Like a lot of people say like, oh, well, how do you mic up a guy's tone or whatever? Like it's seldom that guys will show up here with their rig, bass player or guitar. They just kind of show up and expect me to develop the sound, or knowing that I have a bunch of different amp combinations here or whatever. I think that's just how things are kind of nowadays. You just don't see a lot of guys showing up with their tone. If they do, you better believe I'm going to mic that up because they know what they want already, so that's great. But it's just such a rarity anymore. It's always like they just show up with their instruments, no rigs, and we just dial in a tone for what works with the mix,
Do you find that's a majority bass players that do that, or is that guitar players as well?
I don't think I've ever had a bass player show up here at Rob Arnold World with a bass rig. I mean, they'll show up with like little Tech 21 boxes, Sans amps, stuff like that, but no one's showed. I've never mic'd up somebody's bass cabinet here. And for my own stuff, I don't have a bass sound. Like I do what I said, where I just the performance is what's most important to me, and then I deal with the tone later. Not that that's the best practice, whatever. It's just like I said, though, I haven't really had a lot of experience with a guy showing up with a monster rig that just smokes,
Mm-hmm. I think it's probably a byproduct of that's how bassists get treated live a lot. Is they'll get a DI feed even if they bring a monster rig, and the guy is going to do whatever he's going to do out front and make it. It's basically kick drum and guitars. Vocals will float somewhere. Bass player, if we can find a notch for you, that's where you're going to be.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of used to that type of thing. I bring a lot of pedals with what I do, and I've pretty much got my rig down to a pedal board at this point. But I have a very specific sound that I'm looking to get. It's I've had a few engineers that will weird out where I'm like, okay, here's the important spikes for me: 125, 120, 1.6K, and 3. That's it. Like, start boosting there and we'll be 90%. And they're like, really? But it's it's definitely interesting, like I said, to see the different perspectives, because I know a lot of guitar players, and I'm sure you're probably amongst them, that have a sound that just fits them. You know, this is my head. This is what I do. I've gone through X amount of Celestians, and this is the perfect pair, and I even have them broken in and that kind of thing. And I've always been interested, because I'm so particular about my sound, that I do agree that a lot of bassists kind of go, wherever, just make me heard, basically, and we'll kind of let that go. And I wonder if that isn't kind of a self-defeating thing in a way. And it's like, if you don't set your voice as a bassist up early, nobody's going to do it for you. So you're going to wind up sitting in the background a little too much.
You're right. I think you immediately garner respect from engineers showing up with your rig like you do, when they see what you brought and that you know what you're talking about when you're asking them to cut or boost certain frequencies and stuff like that. That immediately lets them know that, okay, I got to spend a little more time on this guy's sound than the guy who I'm just going to patch into a DI. It's the same with if a guy brings in a super crappy drum set with old beat up heads and broken cymbals. I don't spend as much time miking his kit as I would with somebody where his stuff's pristine.
Sure.
You know? Mm-hmm. Before I even hear him play, you know? So yeah.
It's really interesting to see the same observation from two different sides, the person who would do it and the person who's had to deal with that. Now, do you find the same thing happens live, like with a lot of your touring bands and stuff, that the bassists aren't as particular about what they show up or don't care about what rig they're going through or that kind of thing? No names, don't have to name anybody.
No, well, Jim LaMarca from Chimaira, he was, all of us were just kind of meat and potatoes players. He always just played, threw up a PV head and a PV 810 cab, and he just wanted to be loud. You know, that was his thing. And I'm not even sure that our sound guy for most of the years, Big John, I'm not even sure if he mic'd up his cab. It was probably just a DI, and I think Jim just was mainly more there to just be solid and to fill things in. And Jim has a great sense of timing. He's not a fancy player at all, but he has a great sense of timing, and he knows the pocket, and he knows how to entertain a crowd. And so that's how he was best utilized. And then the only other band I've done shows with was 6 Feet Under, and that was Matt DeVries playing bass as a guitar player, just because they needed a bass player, you know. So it was just like him buying me playing guitar all those years, just on a bass. And I don't think he really cared too much about his tone either. You know, I guess we were more about playing the right notes, sort of thing. So I know this is disappointing for you to hear.
No, and that's the thing is, something I've tried to get across on the channel, why I like the different perspectives, is not everybody wants the same thing. Music is an incredibly personal thing. And if your focus is just pure raw energy, and that's what 80% of what you're doing goes into, then you got to do you. You know, that's your thing. I just happen to be psycho about sound. That's, you know, there's a specific statement I'm trying to make, and my sound is a part of it. If that's not a big deal for someone else, and developing themselves as a live presentation artist, which is a lot harder than people realize, being able to consistently have a presence and interact with an audience and still keep lines together. It may look simple, but it's not. You know, having your mind divided in between, am I entertaining the crowd? Am I focusing on people? Am I hearing the drums and laying right in the pocket? Am I still paying attention to the guitar player? And if something changes, I got to follow and make it look like it was supposed to happen. Am I making room for the singer? So when he's crossover and here, I'm not outshining what he's doing because he's the front man. That's a lot to take on. So if that's what somebody's
important to consider. It's great that you think about those things, and it separates, pros from amateurs.
Exactly. And if that's where that person's excellence is, that's great. You know, I mean, I love complex bass players. Always, you know, I came up on Geddy Lees and guys like that, and always liked that type of thing. You know, worked with Billy Sheehan for a while and stuff. Love that shreddy stuff. But I've gone and watched some fantastic bass players who aren't flashy at what they do. Not metal thing. I just went to see an 80s band. I don't know if you remember The Fix.
I don't.
They're kind of like a new wave type of band. Their bass player is phenomenal. Like, people don't realize, because he stands there like they could put a cartoon, like one of those poster board cutouts of the guy up on the stage and you would never know the difference. Just stands there like this the whole night. And he was dead on. His bass lines were gorgeous. And I just went, this guy is like my dark matter.
Yeah.
But he's killing it. And that's because he's making his statement. And that's the thing. I don't have that judgment thing. I don't think that's right, because I have no place telling someone else what their art should be. You know, I feel like we need more of it. There needs to be more difference between players and respect, rather than it seems like everything's kind of gotten funneled down to, here's what a metal band looks like. Here's what a metal band sounds like. Here's what a rock band sounds. You know, there's a very defined role that kind of goes on these days. And I'm like, personality up, man. You know, do your thing.
Yeah, and if that guy can complete the mission, convey his message to you by just standing there like that and sounding sweet, then you know, mission accomplished.
Exactly. Now, as far as more on the live end of things, as far as engineering and live production and stuff, have you ever noticed or had problems, or noticed problems that the bassists were having that seemed to be consistent, or problems maybe you had working with a bassist or getting a live sound that really functioned?
You know, nothing comes to mind in terms of problems. Maybe you could tell me what you think. It may spark something for me or whatever. What kind of problems do you notice? What do you think?
Usually the traditional volume war that goes on in between guitars and bass.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I find 90% of that is, again, notching frequencies, that everybody's trying to go for that massive, and it just becomes who's going to step on who. Or the bass not being able to be heard on stage consistently, but it's loud as hell in the audience, that type of thing. The guitar players have a hard time locking in with the bassist because they can't hear him well because of either his tone, or it's just consistently a monitor problem or something like that. You know, anything like that type of thing where it becomes a discomfort in between the instruments for one reason or another.
Yeah. I guess I'm fortunate to say I haven't really come across problems like that. Now, in the rehearsal studio where we're still playing live or whatever, back to Jim LaMarca, he, like I said, he always just wants to be loud, and there'd be times where we'd be like turned down. And I learned early on that he would always say, "Oh, okay, no problem," and he'd go over it, but he'd just pretend, you know, because it was after a while I'd start noticing. I'm like, "Hey, that's still on 6 or something or whatever, you know, or are you saying guys are adjusting frequencies on stage and stuff like that? Because I've always thought that that's a no-no, that once you start doing that, it could drive your sound engineer crazy, you know, because all of a sudden the tones and frequencies are changing on stage or whatever, where I thought you should leave that up to him. So I would think that would be a problem if on stage, because you're only doing that for yourself, for what you hear. You don't know what the crowd's hearing, which is, I think, most important. But
you know, for me, that's exactly it. It's I need to hear what I'm doing accurately to be able to do something. So I wouldn't do it during a show, you know, but during a sound check or something, if a hall's more cavernous, or there's a lot of slapback, as I'm sure you've dealt with, you know, something reflecting like hell off of, you're playing a basketball arena that's been converted or something, and you're starting to get a lot of that. I've got to start a lot on my stage rig. I've got to start low pass or high passing. And it may not sound as deep to me on stage, but no one else in the band can hear me, and it's just going to turn into this mud wash underneath of the guitars that actually makes the live sound guy's job even harder. So
I think a tip for younger bands and for a way for bass players to kind of convey this to their guitar players, something that I learned early on is that guitar players don't need as much low end in their sound as they think they do. So when you're sitting there in front of your rig on stage jamming, of course it sounds great with a lot of low end. But if you just consciously dial some of that back and let the bass player do his job down below, and that was when this was told, told to me early on, they use Slayer as an example. You know, Slayer notoriously has those real mid-rangey guitars, but their mix sounds great because Tom can hold down the bottom and the guitars are right there in the middle. Plenty of room throughout the mix instead of everybody fighting for that bottom end. So if bass players can convey that message to their guitar players that, hey, you know, just dial back your lows on stage, it's better for everybody.
Exactly. And that I think this kind of goes full circle back to your thing about the people being in the same room and everything. A lot of this gets figured out in the rehearsal hall. Along with the music comes that signature sound, and it's like, why are we stepping on each other? Why is this going on? And you've done 90% of that dialing and getting the personality of the layers of the band before you hit. It's been interesting to me. That was a big lesson for me when I got the isolated tracks from a few recordings that I really respected and listened to the guitars. And I just went, why does this sound so thin? You know, it even being a bass player, I was just like, really? They're cutting that much out of it? And even how much less gain there was than what I thought, because gain naturally starts to thicken out, you know, and it creates almost on not just the upper, but the subharmonics too. And that starts, you know, clashing against what the bass is contributing. So yeah, you're dead on about that. And that's something that goes studio and live, I think.
Yeah.
I feel like it could, because in the studio it's so readily fixable, it can be a complete, more of a disaster live if that's not fixed, because you've got everybody fighting for the bottom, and then you've got a massive kick and everything, and especially low tune metal or something, you're just gonna, you know, it just become a wash. And I'm sure we've both heard that before at live shows where you're just going, what? What the hell are these guys doing?
Yeah, the band ultimately doesn't have much control over the mix unless you have your own sound guy every night. But face it, that's a huge luxury and a level that only some get to. But if you can do those little things like we're suggesting, like work that out in the rehearsal spot before, it's just those little things add up. Every little improvement you can make, or to put yourself into the position to sound as good as you possibly can going into it, you're going to stand out. Great bands stand out, and that's how you get to the next level.
And you can always tell who did the pre-work, and that's where 90% of it is. It's not the end product, it's the prep, you know.
The little thing I just thought of is I heard a long time ago in an interview, or somebody told me that Eddie Van Halen said, I wish we could record the album after the tour, because during the course of the tour, you work out so many awesome things on stage. You realize that at this one part, you can do this badass harmonic here, where you wish you could have put that on the album, but it took you, 80 shows to figure it out, or to figure out some awesome little thing that you and your drummer connect on every time and stuff like that. So the more time you spend playing with your guys, the more of those little things that can translate to the album, because you really can't do that. You can't record the album after the tour in most cases, but because you got to go out there and promote the record. So, but the more time in the rehearsal spot, better the album's going to be, I bet.
Totally. And it's, again, funny that the stuff is kind of circular and keeps going back to, it just benefits the music more and more if people can start interacting and playing better. That it's the end sound, it's the arrangement. And that's why when you had bands that did have to tour before they did things, or they rode on the road and they were interacting a lot more, the embellishments and the small pieces in the albums are so much more complex than a lot of what we hear now, which tends to be almost loop-based music. It's like, here's a section, here's a part, and that's going to repeat here, and then you're going to hear the exact same chorus again. That all those little pieces don't happen because it just wasn't given time to digest, and all the different spices you would add to the meal don't get thought of or put in there. So again, another great point that reinforces what you said earlier. Now for yourself, do you have any favorite bass players in or out of metal, or guys you were like, man, if I could have a dream project one day, I'd want, that's like the guy I'd want in there, or someone I'd want to play with?
I think it's more so of just guys that I looked up to and thought were badass, more than wanting to just like play with them now. I don't know, because that's just kind of different. I actually heard somebody else say something similar to this the other day, that just because you really respect somebody and their music doesn't mean you really want to go make music with them, because that's all of a sudden that's some totally different thing, like, oh, so, but I mean, I I always loved Newstead growing up, just seeing you know, the live Ship Engine Purge stuff, just seeing how ferocious he was, playing all my favorite songs on Justice, and his backup vocals, all that. I loved watching Rex with Pantera. He was just
Yep.
killer. And David Ellefson, he's just so solid and so confident. I think up there, and his sound to me is just confident. And and we're lucky today we get to hear him play in so many just different little things. And it's, to me, he's always consistent. It's always that awesome sound. That it's like his sound from Megadeth translates to everything. It's just that consistent. His character is great. He's such a great guy too. So
Yeah,
awesome.
it definitely is.
And you're becoming one of my favorites too. I'm looking for more of those.
Appreciate that, man. That's high praise. But on the Ellefson thing, again, I was lucky enough to hear some of his isolated tracks. A band and a performer from Japan named Masaki Murashita sat in and did some of his stuff, and Ellefson also sat in along with, you may know Kevin Talley.
I think I do.
He did drums on that one, and I did some of the bass tracks. Ellefson did the others, so I got to hear it. And it just exactly what you were saying. I'm listening to him engineering his parts, and I'm just going like, this guy's a machine. It's just like, I loved him coming up from, you know, any bass player the first time they hear, you know, Peace Cells intro or something like that, you're just like, oh.
Yeah.
But
I got to play that with him during a NAMM jam in 2009. Got together, Jason Bittner on the drums, Mark Rizzo and me on guitar, Ellefson on bass, Tim Rip Rowan's on vocals, and we did Peace Cells. I think we did like Breaking the Law, maybe like a Sabbath tune or something like that. But I got to play with him, and that was awesome.
That's amazing. Wow, that's a ton of fantastic players, man.
Ellefson, he was our PV rep. I'm sure you know a lot of his history. For people that don't, during the big break in Megadeth he went and worked for PV, and so he was Mira's PV rep who would, you know, get us what we needed. And he'd always come out to the Arizona shows where he was from, and he actually one day pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I do these bass videos for this company called the Rock House Method, and I'd like to recommend you to them to do a guitar DVD." I'm like, "Whoa, really?" I'd never even considered anything like that ever. And I tell people that whether it would have ever happened or not, which it ended up did, I did make a guitar DVD, but had that never happened, just the fact that Dave Ellefson from Megadeth, I mean, I worked with Megadeth growing up, like took note of my playing and stuff. I mean, he's helped me out in a million ways too, and he's just a great guy.
Yeah, he genuinely is. It was interesting for me. This is totally getting into the weeds real quick, but Peace Cells was a formative album. Just speed metal wise, it was just precision, and it's still to this day something I try and incorporate in my music, and I love as a bassist, but is less common, is the swing feel.
Yeah.
They had, you know, Gar on drums that just, you could not get that feel without Gar and without Chris Poland. They brought that fusion element to it. And I've been friends with Chris Poland for a number of years and stuff. And just a phenomenal guitar player. And I got to go see Dave and him reunite for a night and play Peace Cells down here in Long Beach. And that was a trip back in time. An amazing pair up. So like I was suddenly 14 again. Like,
yeah, no, that's awesome. It's a shame about Menza because we're well, wait, no, that was Poland and Menza. I can't think who the guitar player or the who was the bass player on that thing they were doing.
That's again another phenomenal guy. The guy plays a 6-string fretless and just absolutely scares the hell out of him. He just a really, really incredible bassist and total sweetheart of a guy too. But yeah, I remember seeing them in one of the shows with Menza before he passed and everything at the Baked Potato, and that was an incredible trio. It really was.
I wish I could learn that.
Yeah, I think it says a lot that they wound up getting another kind of metal crusher after that one instead of Leaning Fusion. They've got the guy from Warbringer.
Cool. I'm not familiar with him. That's a cool name though.
Yeah, but apparently their drummer's sitting in with them now because I guess they needed that more metal edge after Menza, and he had the same thing, that kind of swing feel. He was brutally efficient and dead on, but he was one of those guys where like I have that thing of like if you could play with a drummer, there's some amazing technical drummers, but Menza just had that magic combo of an incredible feel in a pocket, but could play just high speed, and every hit almost sounded like a trigger. He just beat the hell out of that kit, and there was no trigger about it. He was just on.
Yeah. Since you mentioned again that swing, I'll just take one more stab and say, you know where another place where it's hard to get a good swing? The computer. You know, I mean, easy drummer, superior drummer,
Oh, yeah.
They sound fantastic, but like none of them are gonna sound like Gar or Menza or anything. You know,
Yeah.
they may have a lot of precision, and granted, I mean, they sound great, but that's just that feel. You can't quite get that same feeling.
Exactly. That's something that I've dealt with a lot. A lot of the stuff that I write leans on that. I have a real deep affection for that type of feeling because it's fairly unique in metal to really get a good swing out of something. I miss that from some earlier bands and things. And you're totally right. It's
And all you can do is what you do, and you just pull it. You use what you're doing naturally to pull that swing in. You know, if you're playing digital drums. You know, so.
Yeah, and especially if you're trying to use like pre-done MIDI grooves or something like that, it's not going to work. You got to get a great player, and the way I've had to do everything is get somebody to play it live on an E-kit, and then be able to take the file and edit it if I need to do triggers and that type of thing. Because yeah, you can't. There's just no way to notch it in there. It's just not going to happen.
You can try, yeah, but the human in there will never be the same.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, so as we wrap up here, I want to make sure everybody gets to hear about the projects you're doing and what's on the horizon for you and everything, and what should we be checking out?
When anybody can find what I got going on at Rob Arnold World, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And right now I'm just focusing on just trying to create a bunch of cool content for my YouTube channel. So I'm doing guitar playthroughs of Chimaira stuff. I'm going to do some other stuff from the Elite. I'm doing a new Q&A series I'm calling Everything You Love, and just answering questions, talking about gear, stuff like that. I got a bunch of other stuff in mind too, you know, a bunch of stuff brewing here that I'm trying to put together, plot out, film, and get out there. So just tune in, Rob Arnold World, and love people to come on board and become a part of the community.
Absolutely. And links are going to be to all that down below. Of course, check out all of it. He's putting out some great content, and you know, a fantastic player that can deliver some great ideas and introduce you to some good things. And also, side note, you were, if I'm not mistaken, on my buddy Doc Coyle's podcast recently.
You know, Doc? Yeah, Doc and I go way back. Chimaira and God Forbid have been touring together since the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was fun. It was great to see him and what he's doing now with Bad Wolves. They're just doing great things. So I'm just super proud of him.
Yeah, he's blown up completely, and still Doc. You know, he's still just that thing. He's a good guy.
He's a funny guy.
Yeah, it was a great idea having you on there too. I love the concept for his podcast and having that thing of the post a project player type of thing and retrospective ideas and what they learned from it and everything. So that was a great interview. I'll link to Doc Coyle on there too. So check out not only Rob's interview, but all the other ones on there. Just a treasure trove of information. And so I think we will wrap up here and let you get on to destroying more planets with guitar and bass production here. But thanks again for coming on again. It's been some great information and a real pleasure getting to talk with you and sharing stuff with the audience about your insights from having done and worn so many hats in metal and songwriting production.
Well, thank you, Rodney. Appreciate you having me. It's been a lot of fun talking shop, and I wish you a lot of success with everything you're doing as well. And I can't wait for more.
All right. Appreciate it, Rob. Take care.